Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We are coming off of a weekend and, of course, coming off of 2 full weeks in which we've had first the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention. So I thought we would spend just a little bit of time this first hour looking back over what has happened, but more importantly, looking at what this campaign is going to entail. I might just mention later in the week we have Eric Metaxas on talking about his book, If You Can Keep It, which gets us into patriotism, America's godly heritage, and much more. We also have Dr. John Lott on the program with us as we talk about his new book, The War on Guns. But today, let's, if we can, look a little bit at some of the polling. We don't do this too often, and I will explain why in just a few minutes, but there has always been an assumption that after a Republican convention, there's usually a bump for the Republican nominee. After the Democratic convention, there's usually a bump for the Democratic nominee. So not surprising that Hillary Clinton was able to get a bump. Almost every Democratic nominee for the presidency has. There are only 2 exceptions to that. John Kerry in 2004, basically he had 49% and then 49% again. And then George McGovern, that goes all the way back to 1972, 37% and 37%, which was pretty much a foregone conclusion. He was probably going to lose, and indeed did. So we will look at this, but let's, if we can, maybe just explain that just before the Republican convention, you were essentially tied 42% to 42%. And if you look at the month of July, this comes now out of another source from the Los Angeles Times and tracks every single day, looking at this really from the LA Times presidential election daybreak report, which is different than the CBS report we're going to be talking about. Only one day in all of July was Hillary Clinton's support higher than Donald Trump. That is no longer the case. Now the post-Democratic bump has been somewhat significant. 46% for Hillary Clinton, 39% for Donald Trump. So again, 46% to 39%, and so going up 4 percentage points. It is worth mentioning, too, as we go through this today, that the best estimates that pollsters have are that more than 90%, or basically 9 in 10 Clinton supporters and 9 in 10 Trump supporters, have said they've made up their mind. So most of the noise, most of the commercials, and most of the focus will be on that remaining uncommitted group, a few that are in the Clinton camp, a few in the Trump camp, but mostly in those who either say they won't vote and to see whether or not they will come out to vote, or those who have said they have not made up their mind, which, if you look at the most recent poll, is all of 6%. Then you have to also recognize that 6% is meaningless if they were in a state like California or New York, because that state's going to vote for Hillary Clinton. That 6% would be essentially meaningless in Texas, because that state most likely is going to vote for Donald Trump. So that 6% is a smaller percent in just a few states. And I've mentioned those before, but if you wanted to get it even smaller, some people say if you can just tell us what happens in 4 states, and those would be states like Pennsylvania, Virginia, Florida, and you can add whatever other one you want to add in there. Usually we have to add in Ohio. You could then take 6% of those 4 states, and those might determine who the presidency is. You can see why the other day at one of the conventions they say really this whole battle from now till November 8th is really over maybe not even 300,000 people. And that may be even high if you start looking at just the uncommitted. But let's, if we can, as we talk about this bump, which is pretty much expected, the bump after Barack Obama had his convention the first time, 3%. After the second time, 5%. This time, the bounce for Hillary Clinton, 4%. So not terribly surprising, but nevertheless an illustration of the fact that indeed you expect a bump and some of that will drop back down, but we'll see where it goes. But I thought for just a minute before we get into some other issues, and we're going to talk about third-party candidates, which seem to be surging today. Also, a question that came up on Friday about the crime rate. I want to address that. And those articles, by the way, are on our website, and we're going to get into some other issues as well. I thought I would deal with this issue of polls, because if you've listened to Point of View, you know that unlike a lot of talk shows, we don't talk much about polls. I thought I would mention this one, but there's some very good reasons for that. And the first is that a poll is obviously going to be subject to certain measures, certain margins of error, but we've learned a lot more since then. Let's talk about how you do a poll. If you really want to try to figure out where the American people are, you probably, over a 3-day poll, will interview 1,000 people, and those would be proportioned pretty much over the 3,000 counties in the United States. They try to also proportion it over the 4 major regions, the Northeast, the South, the Midwest, and the West. And then they certainly are trying to do their best to accurately mirror the racial background, the age, and educational makeup. So far, so good. As a matter of fact, if you've ever had any statistics, you recognize that even by polling just 1,000 people, you can accurately represent the wishes of about 200 million adults 19 out of 20 times. That's called a, basically 3 percentage point kind of error. And so that's your kind of your confidence. And that's why they'll say, a margin of 3%. And so that works. Now you might say, well, who are they talking to? I have never had anybody call me. Last year, apparently about 400,000 people were interviewed. But there's 200 million people in the United States, at least adults. So that means your chances of being polled are 500 to 1. So you've got to realize that if you've never met anybody that's been polled, or you haven't either, it doesn't mean a whole lot. But there's a bigger issue, and that is up until now, I'm representing the old way we did polls. Those of us a little bit older recognize that those polls were done with telephones. But there's a problem. Used to be that everybody had a home telephone. I suspect a lot of you do not have a home telephone. You might have a cell phone, so that makes something a little different. And more of these polls are starting to be done online through internet connections. And there is a very significant bias. Matter of fact, last year I wrote about this, and you can find it on our website, pointofview.net. They found that people that were interviewed on the telephone oftentimes would be hesitant to say some things like, their issue of discrimination, or their comments about gay and lesbians, their comment about whether or not they're going to vote for a Marriage Protection Act, or maybe whether or not they were going to vote for Donald Trump because he seemed to be politically incorrect. That's called the social desirability bias, and that has surfaced dramatically in the last couple of years. So oftentimes, they're not lying. They just say, I think I know the answer you want, Hillary Clinton. So I'll tell you Hillary Clinton. Even in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, probably going to vote for Donald Trump. So that's something to pay attention to. And more importantly, when you're dealing with an African-American candidate, which this time in the presidency we're not, there's also what has been called the Bradley effect, or some people call it the Wilder effect. And that is, a number of years ago, Los Angeles Mayor Tom Bradley, who was African-American, they thought he was going to win his election and actually lost because some people were just hesitant to say they were going to vote against an African American. There's a little of that might work this time, where some people might say, well, I'm a little hesitant to say I'm going to vote against Hillary Clinton because, after all, we need to vote for the woman, the first woman ever run for presidency. So the point I'm making is that every one of these polls, they may be statistically accurate, but the social desirability effect and just the fact that a lot of people don't answer their cell phones means you've got to take these polls with a very significant grain of salt. Let's take a break. We'll come back and talk about the third-party candidates that seem to be surging. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, if you took the time to watch the two conventions, you would certainly wonder which view of Congress is correct. To listen to many of the Republican delegates, as well as many conservative talk shows, you would think that the Republican-led Congress was a do-nothing Congress. To listen to the Democrats, you would conclude that Congress has stymied President Obama and his agenda at every turn. What's the real story? Let me provide a short list of things that Congress has done and other legislative items they prevented. This can be found in a Wall Street Journal editorial with the title, "What Has Congress Ever Done for Us?" The Republican Congress promised to repeal Obamacare and did so this year. Of course, it was never going to happen with President Obama in the White House. Congress has imposed a lower spending path than most people expected. It also made several tax provisions permanent so that it won't be subject to future attempts by lobbyists to change them. It also passed an education reform and fixed one of the problems with Medicare. It is also true that the Republican Congress prevented much of President Obama's agenda. They prevented the establishment of a $15 an hour national minimum wage, a bailout of the provision of Obamacare, universal pre-K, and the closing of Guantanamo Bay. Perhaps now you can see why you have heard two very different perspectives about Congress at the two political conventions. If you wanted Congress to advance an agenda, you only have a few bills that are passed. If you wanted Congress to push a Democratic agenda, you will complain that many of those issues that the current president could not get through Congress. It is fair to say that either assessment is accurate depending on your perspective. It is also certain that the person we elect as president in November would put forth his or her agenda and either work with Congress or fight Congress. That's why the November elections for president and Congress are so important. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Betrayal, slavery, revenge, redemption. Ben-Hur, in theaters August 19th from Paramount Pictures, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In fact, once again, if you'd like to join our conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Did mention the fact that there is a post-Democratic convention bounce to Hillary Clinton, up to 46% compared to 39% to Donald Trump. Then you have 3% that say other, but of course they don't mention those, and I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. You know, the third-party candidates, because these poll numbers change, our percentages change a little bit once you mention some of the other third-party candidates, and both of them are surging right now. Both of them, by I mean the Libertarian Party and the Green Party. And then some who say they won't vote and others are not sure. So that's something to pay attention to. And I did give you just a little bit of a thought on taking some of these polls with a grain of salt. Some have been more accurate than others. That's why a lot of people have begun to follow some of the things that Nate Silver has done, for example, because he was much more accurate in predicting the election or re-election of Barack Obama over Mitt Romney when everybody else thought Mitt Romney was probably going to win. And a lot of this is not only in the polling itself and what I call the social desirability bias, and that is I probably would not tell somebody on the phone or I might be more reluctant, for example, to tell somebody on the phone that I'm not going to vote for Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton because I feel like, well, I should because one is an African American, other is a woman. But there are some other very difficult issues, and those have to do with turnout. When you try to do these polls, the most accurate ones, of course, the most accurate poll happens in November. But okay, certainly the ones that are closer to accurate are those that have done a better job of determining who actually is going to vote. Those polls of likely voters are difficult and sometimes require additional questions. Are you going to vote this November? Yes. Did you vote last November? Well, no. Okay, that already sets up whether or not I believe that you're going to vote this time. And there are all sorts of other kinds of questions that are helpful to really begin to determine who likely voters are. And in this particular election, let's mention something else. These are not popular candidates. This is why, in just a minute, we're going to spend some time talking about the fact that you have these third-party candidates doing a little bit better, because neither Hillary Clinton nor Donald Trump engender the same kind of enthusiasm that, say, you've had sometimes in the past with other candidates. I think that's a foregone conclusion, and if you want to agree or disagree with that, you're free to. Aspect of polling, and one of the reasons why I don't spend a whole lot of time on it. But we also see, and I think we're going to see over the next couple of days, a reaction perhaps to some of the back and forth over the speech that was given last week by the father of the Muslim soldier who was killed in Iraq, Khizr Khan. And he talked to Donald Trump directly and no one, and then at one point said, you have no right to stand Constitution. By the way, one of the things we're going to be doing today, if you go to our website, pointofview.net, for your gift, we're going to be giving out, again, our pocket constitutions. Ever since Khizr Khan held up a copy of a pocket constitution, all sorts of people have been ordering some of those online. We certainly wanted to make those available to you as well. If you go to our website, pointofview.net, there's a banner there that says, you could actually make a difference in the next generation for a gift as small as $5. And you, of course, also will see a picture of the Constitution there. I thank you for your gift of support. So let me just mention that at the source of some of this controversy was the claim by the father of that Muslim soldier who was killed in Iraq that Donald Trump had not read a Constitution. So Donald Trump went back and said he has no right to stand in front of millions of people and claim I've never read the Constitution. But, of course, the bigger issue was some of the things that he had to say about his wife, and this has led to sort of a back and forth. And if nothing else, this is another kind of illustration of what Donald Trump needs to begin to think about as we come in now to the election season. Some people are saying maybe he should keep quiet or at least stop attacking. And David French said the other day, here's a handy rule of life. Always honor Gold Star families, always, because once a family has lost someone serving in this military and defending this nation, no matter what that particular father or mother might say, I think it just is really bad form and really not very helpful. I mean, just forget about the bad manners for a minute. Just think about how crass it comes off looking. You would want to say to Donald Trump, what did you think you were going to gain by criticizing the father and mother of an individual, though Muslim? And, of course, now everybody likes to point out that the father is involved and tied into the Muslim Brotherhood and all the rest. But again, what did you think you were going to gain by attacking these parents who lost a son fighting for this country? I mean, this is a no-win proposition. Now, when we talk about the attack on Gold Star families, you can talk about his attack, but you can also talk about, and the reason this was done in the first place was at the Republican convention. You might remember there was Pat Smith, the mother of Sean Smith, who was killed in Benghazi, and said that Hillary Clinton lied to her face and said that she has been lying all the time about this. And Hillary Clinton comes back by saying, well, I don't flaw them for maybe mishearing what I had to say, although there were other people that heard this as well. So this whole back and forth about these Gold Star families, I think the wiser idea, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side, is just stop talking about it and certainly stop attacking. But nevertheless, over the next couple of days, it is quite possible, because of that, in light of the polls we just talked about, that Donald Trump's numbers might go down a little bit, and we'll see if they come back up or whether that's the beginning of the end for his campaign. But meanwhile, I thought we'd spend just a few minutes talking about these third-party candidates. From time to time, some of you call in and say, well, I'm going to vote for a third-party candidate. And again, you're free to do so. But what I think is so intriguing is that this time it's not as simple as it usually is. Most people, and anybody that will call into this program, will oftentimes say, well, voting for a third-party candidate is voting for Hillary Clinton. Well, that's not always the case. It is possible that voting for Ross Perot back in 1992 might have helped Bill Clinton, although it looks like he probably would have won whether or not Ross Perot ran. But I think it is really clear that Ralph Nader's 2.5 percentage points in Florida were certainly the reason that George Bush beat Al Gore in Florida and became president. So sometimes the third-party candidate helps the Democrat. Sometimes the third-party candidate helps the Republican. And this time we have the possibility of both taking place, because you have voters in each party right now looking for an alternative. You have Republicans who did not support Donald Trump and might be looking elsewhere. You have all sorts of Bernie Sanders supporters who might be looking for an alternative. Matter of fact, one the other day I saw who had been speaking on behalf of Bernie Sanders now came out in favor of Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate. So we'll see where this goes. Over the last week or so, Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson has gone from 4.5% to 7.2%. That's a pretty significant jump. And again, that's looking at the Real Clear Politics polling averages. If that continues, he will actually, in many ways, determine who the next president was, because if he's pulling these from some of those key states which we just talked about, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, Virginia, then you can see what will happen there. But on the other hand, you also have the Green Party candidate, Jill Stein, who has seen an increase from 2.5% to 3.5%. Not quite the same kind of surge, but that's really interesting, because you can look at some of the polls that have come down, and the polls seem to show that Libertarian Gary Johnson will pull maybe more from conservative voters than from liberals. But just the opposite seems to be true for the Green Party candidate, Jill Stein. In other words, she would pull more from the liberal voters or the progressive voters. So that, I thought, was kind of interesting. Now, if that isn't confusing enough, and we'll take a break, the latest Quinnipiac poll found that Donald Trump did better in the polls when the pollsters listed all four candidates: Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Gary Johnson, and Jill Stein. So there is an interesting factor playing out this time because of the unpopularity generally of the two major party candidates. And also, I might say, Gary Johnson is certainly well known to, for example, our listeners in New Mexico and other places. And William Weld, interestingly enough, his vice presidential nominee in the Libertarian Party, was very well known in Massachusetts because he served as governor there. Republican governor, just like Mitt Romney was a Republican governor in Massachusetts. So I'd love to see how that plays out. But let's open up the phones, give you a chance to join our conversation. Perhaps you have some thoughts about polls, have some thoughts about some of the back and forth over the Gold Star families, or perhaps some thoughts about third-party candidates. And so we would love to give you that opportunity. So let's open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. And I encourage you to visit our website today. You'll find some of these articles on third-party candidates. One, answering the question, which we'll get to before the end of the hour: has the crime rate gone up or down? Because we have different statements being made about that. And most importantly, if you'd like to get a free copy of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, we have that available as well. And it's there for your gift of just about any size. We'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
I had what many would call the Cadillac of insurance plans with my company. It covered everything, and that's what got us started thinking, well, what is everything? Are we indirectly paying for people to use services that we don't believe in or want to be a part of? And MediShare was the perfect answer for that.
I felt such relief switching over to MediShare. I wasn't paying for anything that I didn't believe in. I was actually able to stand up for what I believe in, and I was able to put my money where my faith is.
We're part of this great program, and it really costs us less than insurance.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 855-BIBLE-11. Not available in Montana. MediShare, affordable biblical health care. Call 855-BIBLE-11. That's 855-BIBLE-11.
Point of View Radio needs you in 2016. Join today at pointofview.net. Become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net. Or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View.
The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station.
And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Like to join a conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to Illinois first. Evan, thank you for joining us today. What would you like to add to our conversation?
I think the mainstream media really only focuses on the Republican and Democratic parties. And, it puts it at a disadvantage for a good Libertarian or a good Green Party candidate to get that airtime because, you see, there was a convention for the Libertarian candidate presidency and no one knew about it. You didn't see that in any of the mainstream media. And, you look at the presidential debates, they only have Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton competing in it.
Right.
So,
And let me jump to that real quick. I'll let you finish, but let me jump to that because what has to happen in order for Gary Johnson or anybody else, but he's the most likely candidate, to join that is to get 15%. So the surge right now is in the right direction, but he's going to have to double his support. And that's why, just to answer the question for some people, well, what about that time when you had Bill Clinton and George Herbert Walker Bush and Ross Perot? That's because Ross Perot was able to actually poll at that level. And so, go ahead. I'll let you finish, but I just want people to understand there is a reason. It's not like they're being discriminating. Right. You have to reach a certain threshold. Otherwise, if they allowed anybody running for the presidency, I think the number is we're getting close to almost 200 people running for the presidency. Now, not that many are on those ballots, but nevertheless, that's something that needs to be considered as well. But Evan, continue.
And, you see, that goes back to the media. The media doesn't cover the Libertarian or Green Party at all. So, all these people, you have these the Bernie Sanders supporters who, when he lost the nomination, you have them like, well, I don't like Hillary Clinton, so I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. Or you have, well, I hate Donald Trump, so I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton. And, they don't get that opening to the Libertarian or Green Party. And, it really puts them at a disadvantage to get that, to get that spotlight, get that coverage out there, so people who only follow it on the news channels and they don't really do their research,
sure,
they're not going to be able to get to know them and actually understand what their views are. A lot of them, they're similar with each other. You've got Donald Trump, who's a hothead, and you got Hillary Clinton, who, she's blind and Benghazi and all this stuff, and it just puts them against one another. So come the presidential debate time, I have a feeling, if it's Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton only there, it's just going to be an insult battle. Who has the better insult against one another? Who can, humiliate the other one without actually focusing on the issue?
Sure. Well, again, I wanted to talk a little bit about third-party candidates today. The first article there is third-party candidates surging. It'll give you a little more history. I'm going to write a commentary that will come out next week, and you can read a little bit more about that. And, of course, in the past, we have occasionally had a chance to interview some of the libertarian candidates on this program, and so we'll see what unfolds in that regard. Let's take another phone call real quickly. We'll head to South Carolina, WAGP. Johanna, thank you for calling today.
Hello, thank you very much for taking my call. I listen to this station every day, and I think it's very interesting, the topics they bring up, because you'll never hear them on the mainstream radio or TV.
Bingo. That's right. That's what we do here. Go ahead.
Yep, you'll never hear the things. And the one thing that really irritates me in the book of Hosea, it says, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge.
Yes.
And the people that talk about the Quran don't even know people that don't know the Quran have no idea what it says, and people that have read it like I have, it scares me to death. It's completely contrary to what the Bible teaches. So that Mr. and Mrs. Khan that waves the Constitution around as saying Donald Trump hadn't read it, I bet a lot of people don't have any idea what the Quran says. It's very dangerous and very scary. It's completely contradictory to the Bible. And I wonder if that Mr. Khan has read the Bible.
I don't know. But you've mentioned it again. And again, as we have done before, we give out a copy of the Declaration of the Constitution. I'm holding it up right now. And again, as a thank you for your gift of support, we'll send that to you. And his challenge was, Mr. Trump, have you even read the Constitution? Well, I think it's a good question. For our listeners, we'll give you a copy of the Constitution to read. But let's just give everybody an assignment. That is, I know most people are not going to sit sit down and read the Quran. And they're certainly not going to use it for their daily quiet time. So here's my suggestion. Just read one chapter out of the Quran, and I would say that would be chapter 9, Surah 9. The chapters are called surahs, and chapter 9 is one of the last chapters to have been written, and it's the one that helps you understand the concept of jihad and the struggle. And so if you could just, and you don't have to go buy a Quran, you can go online and probably find one and just read chapter 9, Surah 9. And over the next couple of days, if some of you do that and you want to call in and tell me what you found, then I think we'd be a lot more educated. So, Johanna, thank you so much for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you very much for taking my call, and God bless you.
I certainly appreciate your phone call. Let me, before I take another phone call, answer a question. Those of you that might have been listening on Friday, we had Bob from Missouri, and he was saying, I got a problem because the president said that Donald Trump was wrong, that the crime rate has been going down. And I tried to explain that, well, historically, yes, the crime rate has been dropping for many years. So if you take a larger snapshot, say from the 1990s to now, you'd say, yeah, the crime rate has gone down. But the reality is in the last year or two, the crime rate has gone up dramatically. And so I've posted this article. It's actually written by Newt Gingrich. And you just have to look at a few of the facts. He gives you the links, so you can go to the links themselves. So if you say, well, I don't trust Newt Gingrich. Okay, well, he's giving you all the links. You can go and read them in their entirety. The latest data from the FBI says that the homicide rate rose by 6%. The rape jumped 9.6%. So again, the homicide rate 6.2%, rape rate 9.6% in the first half of 2015 compared. Sir Richard Rosen, in an analysis of 56 different major cities, found that murders in those cities had increased 16% to 17% at that time, a rate that Michael Barone, who's at the American Enterprise Institute, called unprecedented. And the problem with those is that they actually are sort of trying to get a snapshot. If you go to some of the others, for example, that are maybe a little more contemporaneous, what's happening right this minute, because most statistics you have to go and look for the previous year. And so you do have a few of those. For example, in Chicago, there are over 70% more murders this year than were in 2014. And frankly, if the trend continues, there will be over 600 murders in Chicago. So you can see that shows a more contemporaneous look at the data. And then you have the survey that was done by the Major Cities Police Chiefs Association, and they found in the 51 large cities surveyed, violent crime, again, was worse. So what we're seeing is not only has it increased when we look at statistics, and those would be like comparing 2015 to 2014, but already we're starting to see in 2016 it's worse than it was in 2015. So anyway, in case Bob is listening or anybody else wondered about that, there's a good example of where Barack Obama said, no, the crime rate isn't going up. Well, over the last couple of decades, yes, it's been going down, but something happened. I think it happened in Ferguson, Missouri, and then in Baltimore, Maryland. Can you maybe think about what that was that has changed dramatically the murder rate and some of the other issues, and also the way in which the police themselves have actually responded to some of that, which has been called the Ferguson effect, which we've talked about here on the program. So there are just a couple of key issues that I thought you might want to know about, and that article is available on our website, pointofview.net. Let's go back to the phones. We'll head out to Texas this time. KBJS. Lance, thank you for calling today.
Thank you for taking my call. This is a comment for Christians only. I know some evangelicals in the Christian community don't want to vote for Donald Trump. I would refer them to an article by Wayne Grudem in townhall.com, who wrote a wonderful article about that. Wayne Grudem is not a political guy, at least historically. He's a writer of systematic theology textbooks. He's been doing that for a while, and they're in seminaries, conservative seminaries, across the country now. And I would just recommend people read that article. It's very enlightening. He's very wise, and he makes the case. I think he would even make the case, based on Scripture, that he thinks it's a morally wrong not to vote for Donald Trump.
Yes, and the
to
article,
stay
by the way, is
home.
called Why Voting for Donald Trump is a Morally Good Choice. It takes 10 pages you print it out. And ever since he's written that, if you've been paying attention, and I've been sending it to everybody, there have been all sorts of criticisms of him as well. And then I might also mention another one by Dutch Sheets Ministries, What Should Christians Consider When Deciding Whom to Vote For? So these are two articles we're going to try to post with the point counterpoint back and forth. So Wayne Grudem's been on this program a number of times before, not only talking about theology, but also talking about his book on politics and government. So Lance, a great resource. And again, put enough paper in your printer, because this article by Wayne Grudem, Why Voting for Donald Trump is a Morally Good Choice, it's 10 pages long, goes into it in quite some detail. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and certainly Lance helped us know about this article, which we're going to be posting. And one of the reasons I didn't post it today is because Wayne Grudem, I think, did a very good job of trying to summarize the issues. But at the same time, this article has been very strongly criticized by a number of fellow Christians, sometimes with such a mean-spirited kind of mindset. I was trying to find kind of a good point counterpoint so that at least you wouldn't have to put up with some of the ad hominem attacks. So we'll see what we can do. Wayne Grudem, if you're not familiar, of course, was very instrumental not only in writing systematic theologies and is well known for that, also was very much involved with the ESV Study Bible, and of course has been on the program talking about everything from politics to economics to theology. And of course, that was one of the criticisms people are making. Well, what kind of expert are you? Well, first of all, I think anybody can be an observer of the political arena, and he goes into some detail trying to explain this. He starts out, of course, talking about the fact that Donald Trump has a lot of flaws, and that's where he's received most of his criticism. But I think, again, even if he has the flaws, if you look at the election as a binary issue, you either vote for Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, there's your choices. But then he goes on and talks about what the Supreme Court would be like with Hillary Clinton as president, and takes on some of those issues like abortion, religious liberty, which he goes into in some detail, Christian business owners, Christian schools and colleges, churches, freedom of speech, criminalizing dissent, and then goes back and said, okay, what would the Supreme Court be like with Donald Trump as president? And takes on the issues again of abortion and religious liberty and freedom of Christian influence in politics and the rest. Then he answers some other questions. Well, how can we know that Donald Trump won't change his mind? And then what about some of these other issues like taxes and jobs and minorities, the military, border, ISIS, terrorism, China, Russia, Israel, energy, executive orders, health care, and much more. And I think you can see that it's 10 pages long. And I think it's certainly something that, as Bob pointed out, or Lance pointed out just a minute ago, is something that we should really focus some of our time and attention on. So I'm going to post it, but I wanted to find something that maybe was a response, at least in a more legitimate way, rather than just simply attacking Wayne Grudem or asking what kind of expertise he has to give any kind of biblical insight into the political arena. My argument is that all of us should work to apply biblical principles to every area of life. Certainly, some of us are more expertise in some areas than others, but only when you have somebody disagreeing with you do they then begin to challenge your expertise. I've seen it happen so many times before. But let's take just a few more phone calls, and I think Patricia in Texas wants to speak to the issue of the third-party candidates, and of course one of those is, of course, the Libertarian Party candidate, Gary Johnson. So, Patricia, what do you want to say about him?
Well, if I have it, thanks for taking my call, but if I have it right, he's the one that was a former New Mexico governor.
That is true.
Okay, I first saw him the other night watching Dana on the Glenn Beck program. She was asking him questions regarding Christians being put in situations that go against their beliefs, like the bakers, photographers, and different people. He sounds more like he's going to be on President Obama's line of thinking. He doesn't sound like he's going to have your back on that. So that right there is a no-go with him. I heard when I got in my car a while ago, the young man talking about he's not getting enough, attention, publicity, or whatever. So I just wanted to know that on that issue alone, to him, I would say no.
Sure. And on Friday, we talked a little bit about all three of the candidates on how they would stand on the issue of religious liberty. I think we know where Hillary Clinton would stand, and this piece that I just mentioned a minute ago by Wayne Grudem goes into it in some detail in terms of course, the bakers and also the Christian businesses, Hobby Lobby, and the rest. If she can put more people on the court, Hobby Lobby would not have won. Hobby Lobby would have had to knuckle under, actually go out of business. When you go to Gary Johnson, he actually the other day, this is his phrase, he said that he thought that religious liberty is a black hole. So Hillary Clinton sees any question about religious liberty as being discrimination and something that should be tamped down. If there's any dispute at all between gay rights, LGBT rights, and religious rights, religious rights lose. So that's her philosophy. But Gary Johnson says it's basically a black hole. And so you have that same series of arguments. When you go to Donald Trump, okay, he's kind of new to the game, but one of the things I thought was so interesting, he's so new to the game, he was the one that brought up this 1954 amendment that was added by Lyndon Johnson that actually prevents pastors and churches from even speaking to some of the political issues, and he has pledged to repeal that 1954 Johnson Amendment. I can't even think of other so-called Christian candidates that have brought that up. I think partially because he's so new to the game, he can't believe that something like that actually exists. So I think you see on the issue of religious liberty with the three candidates we've just talked about a remarkable difference. And that is, again, Gary Johnson, certainly very libertarian, believes that we should, of course, legalize, decriminalize marijuana. We should decriminalize a number of other social behaviors simply because that's not the role of the government to even deal with some of these ethical issues. So I would have to say, Patricia, when you look at it in that regard, I think most people that believe that we should apply biblical principles to society would have a real problem, not only with Hillary Clinton, but also with Gary Johnson. Does that help?
Yes, I chose right then. I said, well, you're off my list. Not that he was really on it, but you're off my list.
I would imagine probably for most people, Gary Johnson would be off the list, but not all, because I do know Christian libertarians. But I would have to say that, again, you're probably not going to find a lot of people that are going to be supporting Jill Stein either in the Green Party, but we'll see how it plays out. Both of these third-party candidates, though, are beginning to surge. The surge has been more significant in Gary Johnson's case, and thus I think there is evidence that that might harm Donald Trump more than it would harm Hillary Clinton. But every vote that Jill Stein picks up almost for certain was a vote that would have gone to Hillary Clinton. And the biggest issue in this survey that I mentioned are just the number of people that are pretty much saying, I'm going to stay home. And I think that includes individuals that were Bernie Sanders supporters that have not really liked Hillary Clinton, and probably also includes a number of individuals that are Republicans that just say, I can't in good conscience vote for Donald Trump, but I'm not real thrilled about any of these third-party candidates. So it will be an interesting election to follow, but we need to take a break. When we come back, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the issue of health care, but we're going to do it in a little different way. Dr. Robert Sewell is with us. He has written an incredible series called A Surgeon's Heart. And in these books, he's really tried to, in many ways, educate us about what's going on in the healthcare realm, but to do it in a fictional setting. And so I think you're going to find this to be very interesting, but at the same time, back to one of the key issues that I know a lot of people are going to be voting for and about when they look not only at the presidential candidates, but also the senatorial and congressional candidates. Do we think that the direction healthcare delivery is going right now is the best way to go? Are we pleased with our health insurance policy that we have? And so we've got some really important questions we're going to put on the table, but a lot of this simply comes from a fascinating way of looking at these issues by following the fictional story of Dr. Jack Roberts in his series called A Surgeon's Heart. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, if you have comments or questions about healthcare delivery and about healthcare insurance and those kinds of issues, we certainly do welcome your phone calls, and we certainly also encourage you to visit the website, pointofview.net. And as you do so, you'll see that we are making available, especially since so many people apparently were holding up copies of the Constitution. If you want your own pocket Constitution and pocket Declaration of Independence, that's our thank you gift for your support of this ministry. Let's take a break. We'll come back and spend some time talking with Dr. Robert Sewell. All that coming up right after this.
Did you know there's an approved healthcare choice just for Christians that's founded on the timeless principles in God's Word? It's not insurance. It's Medishare. Over 189,000 believers across America who love God and share each other's healthcare bills. It's about half the cost of health insurance, and you never pay for medical practices that go against your Christian beliefs. Best of all, the healthcare law includes a special provision for Medishare members, so you don't have to buy insurance or face penalties. Medishare is affordable health care without compromise.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 855-BIBLE-11. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical health care. Call 855-BIBLE-11. That's 855-BIBLE-11.
Cast your vote today for Point of View Radio. Please become a monthly partner at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time talking about healthcare policy, but we're going to do it in a way I think it's going to be very interesting, because it is based on a series of novels. Matter of fact, this would make great summer reading, but again, you're going to have a chance to hear a little bit more about some of the kinds of things we've talked about before when we've expressed how, in many cases, individuals are concerned about the direction of healthcare is going, and we've talked about this with Dr. Ben Carson, and we've talked about this with Michael Burgess, and certainly Buddy Matthews been in studio with us many times before. We bring to the microphone this time Dr. Robert Sewell, individual that graduated from Lamar University with a bachelor's degree and then went on to the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston, received his medical degree, then was accepted into the residency program in general surgery at the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio, completed his training there, and has been practicing in the mid-cities. He's an individual that has been a member of the American Society of General Surgeons, later served as the president for that organization for a period of time, that was a fellow with the American College of Surgeons, and also served as governor in that regard. But in addition to practicing medicine, is quite a writer, and has a series of books, all under the title A Surgeon's Heart: The Calling, the Conflict, the Crisis, the Choice, and the Challenge. And we're going to be talking about this, and I think you're going to find it fascinating, because oftentimes when we talk about healthcare policy, we're interested because it affects ourselves, but it's sometimes difficult to understand what's going on in medicine. And Robert Sewell, you've actually taken us behind the scenes, because we follow the life of a fictional man, Dr. Jack Roberts, and what he goes through in his medical practice.
Well, first of all, Kelly, thank you so much for, Kerby, I'm sorry. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about this subject. It's obviously something I'm very passionate about. The book series kind of arose out of a conversation that we had during one of our church small group meetings several years ago, when one of my colleagues, who basically is not involved in medicine, and he just listened to me talking about Obamacare and all the things that were happening, and he said, you know what you need to do? You need to write a screenplay of a group of doctors that goes behind the scenes and underground and stays one step ahead of the death panels. And of course, we all laughed, and I thought about it for about 2 seconds. I said, I'm not a screenplay writer. But then I'd been writing some blog posts about the various things that were going on with healthcare, and I decided that really what people want, they're not as interested about being informed and educated about things. They want to be entertained. And I watched the movie Hunger Games, and it was such an entertaining but also informative story, that you began to realize that this is the sort of thing that really could happen if people weren't paying attention. So I decided, why not write a story about a physician, what it means to be called to this profession, what it means to go through the necessary gauntlet to achieve that status. And I chose as my main character a pediatric heart surgeon, because I wanted an emotionally attractive topic, something that would draw people's attention.
Yeah, well, Jack Roberts goes through quite a bit. And so we're going to take him through that. But at the same time, I think it's a good way to illustrate some of the problems. And Dr. Sewell, when I open up the phones, whenever we talk about healthcare, we have people call in and talking about the fact that they can't get insurance because of pre-existing conditions. Or they would really like the policy they had, but they were told by the Affordable Care Act, no, you can't have that policy, and they've seen their premiums go up dramatically. But you take us to some other issues that maybe our listeners are not aware of, and that is the corporatization of medicine and just the tremendous number of pressures that are placed upon you as a physician. Can you speak to that for just a minute?
Sure. And actually, again, I don't want to preach to people about this sort of thing because, every time a physician stands up and talks about how bad something is, most people just kind of nod their head and say, yeah, but you've got such a good life, you're a doctor. That's not necessarily the case. And what we're seeing is how all of these regulations, the whole idea of the government deciding whether or not you're going to get paid X amount or X amount minus 10%, or maybe get a bonus if you play their game right. That all kind of speaks to the antithesis of why most of us went into medicine. We didn't go there to be told this is how you're going to practice. We spent a lot of time and a lot of effort learning what to do, and to do it for individual patients, not for some group social status in a group that is out there, and that's who our customer is. I find that's really a wedge that's being driven in between physicians and patients, that we're spending more time at a computer terminal trying to figure out how to document the right diagnosis and looking up what the best practices guidelines are. It has driven most of my colleagues into a sense of frustration that the joy of practicing medicine is all but evaporated. And the younger generation that's coming along, they don't know any different because they're being taught throughout their residencies, you follow the guidelines. And I find that to be, they're kind of creating they're losing the professionalism and creating a craft, if you will, as opposed to practicing medicine.
Another thing we've talked about is following the guidelines. It doesn't sound too bad until you realize that some of the people setting the guidelines aren't people that are actually physicians. And one example of that shows up today in the Wall Street Journal, of all things. Bob Coker, he was actually part of the team that gave us the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. And he said the law's drafters wanted consolidation. 112 hospital mergers last year, but smaller practices have improved care. In other words, he thought, well, could all of you in these massive groups of doctors and these massive kind of almost multinational corporations, and that would be better. And it turned out that wasn't the case. And so the title of his piece today in the Wall Street Journal is How I Was Wrong About Obamacare. Now, that comes from one of the people that actually helped pass Obamacare, right?
That's correct.
That is incredible. So again, we are seeing some people saying this isn't working out so well. And also, I would encourage our listeners, the next time they go to a doctor's office, maybe ask the nurse or the doctor, how many people here are actually doing medicine, and how many people are actually in front of computers filling out forms?
Well, this is the reason why several years ago I decided I wasn't going to play their game. I don't participate in insurance contracts. I opted out of Medicare. I don't contract with anybody except the patient. And in doing that, it saves a lot of hassle and expense on one end, but it also involves educating the public about what it means to actually have a relationship with where your physician works for you. Whereas if you have a contract with the insurance company or a contract with the government, that's where you get your paycheck. And the good book says, no man can serve two masters. Unfortunately, that's what we're being asked to do.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about these fictional books, and we have a link to asurgeonsheart.com, so you can actually order any or all of those books. Great summer read, and at the same time, you're going to learn a little bit more about why health care is so expensive, why doctors are so frustrated, why many are leaving the profession, and at the same time, I'm sure you'll get your heart pumping, and a cardiologist kind of likes that. So we're going to take a break, and we'll continue our conversation today with Dr. Robert Sewell. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, if you took the time to watch the two conventions, you would certainly wonder which view of Congress is correct. To listen to many of the Republican delegates, as well as many conservative talk shows, Democrats, you would conclude that Congress has stymied President Obama to things that Congress has done and other legislative items they prevented. This can be found in a Wall Street Journal editorial with the title, "What Has Congress Ever Done for Us?" The Republican Congress promised to repeal Obamacare and did so this year. Of course, it was never going to happen with President Obama in the White House. Congress has imposed a lower spending path than most people expected. It also made several tax provisions permanent so that it won't be subject to future attempts by lobbyists to change them. It also passed an education reform and fixed one of the problems with Medicare. It is also true that the Republican Congress prevented much of President Obama's agenda. They prevented the establishment of a $15 an hour national minimum wage, a bailout of the provision of Obamacare, universal pre-K, and the closing of Guantanamo Bay. Perhaps now you can see why you have heard two very different perspectives about Congress at the two political conventions. If you wanted Congress to advance an agenda, you only have a few bills that are passed. If you wanted Congress to push a Democratic agenda, you will complain that many of those issues that the current president could not get through Congress. It is fair to say that either assessment is accurate depending on your perspective. It is also certain that the person we elect as president in November would put forth his or her agenda and either work with Congress or fight Congress. That's why the November elections for president and Congress are so important. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Betrayal, slavery, revenge, redemption. Ben-Hur, in theaters August 19th from Paramount Pictures, rated PG-13.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Robert Sewell, so you can watch it online or listen as well. And we do have a link to his website, asurgeonsheart.com. And so all 5 of the books are there, available in print form as well as an ebook. You can even get signed copies if you'd like. This might be something you might want to give to your doctor and encourage them. A great summer read, and we're going to work our way through just a little bit in that. 5 books that would take 5 hours at least to go through all of that. So we'll do our best to give you a brief summary of some of those, and at the same time talk about what are some of the solutions. The first one, though, is the calling. And you got 2 young kids enjoying the idea of being doctors someday. And most people go into medicine because they want to heal. They want to help. And that calling is a high calling. And yet, as we've already alluded to, sometimes it's been destroyed by all the bureaucratic red tape, first with insurance companies, now with bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. But go back to this idea of the calling. What was the calling for Dr. Jack Roberts?
Well, actually, the 2 characters depicted on the cover are Jack, the older brother, and his brother Ben. And Ben was born with a congenital heart defect. And this was back in the 50s.
Wow.
So you can imagine the challenge associated with trying to get that taken care of, and because open heart surgery just wasn't done. except in very, very few circumstances back in 53 to 55 time frame. So it talks a little bit about the history, but it also kind of speaks to the idea that when people are young and they're impressionable, certain things can happen. And when they happen, you never know what it's going to be, but something triggers that calling. Something becomes you can't go any other direction. If you're truly called to a profession, people can say, well, I choose to do this. Or you don't choose. It chooses you. Mm-hmm. And that was the case in Jack's situation. And obviously it takes him up through his history. He trained where he did his training and a little bit of that. But the key to the book is early on, there's a relationship that occurs outside the United States. He's on a medical mission, mm-hmm. and he encounters a circumstance that really changes his life.
Well, and again, a lot of people that we know that are doctors, and matter of fact, Dr. Brantley, who was, of course, the one that got Ebola, he's going to be sitting in that chair 2 weeks from today, and so we'll be talking with him as well. So we'll talk about the calling of people into medicine. But I wanted to get to the next one because that's the conflict. And again, if you look at the cover of that, or if you even go to the website, you see this doctor with kind of an angry look looking at the hospital administrator. And that's the conflict, because the situation is, I'm thinking about my grandfather when he was a doctor. There was nobody intruding in. I mean, it was between the doctor and the patient. There was virtually no governmental regulations. If they couldn't pay, they'd give him a chicken. I mean, really, that's kind of what it was like back when my grandfather practiced medicine. It is very different for you today, isn't it?
Well, in a way it is. In a way, for me personally, it's not, because I'm kind of still in that.
I
opted out of that. But the problem is that the system continues to try and control what physicians do.
Right.
And it does so by a lot of different methods. It's not just the government saying you will practice X, Y, Z. All of the financial aspects of big business are being brought to bear on physicians. They're being forced into joining large groups, mm-hmm. Who then have certain criteria that must be met, and that don't have anything at all to do with the practice of medicine.
Right.
And hospital administrators, they have their job. They're trying to keep the hospital afloat, and obviously they sometimes comes to a collision between what the physician feels is in his best interest for the patient versus what the hospital may decide they want to do. And I want to say, first of all, that I don't really want to make it sound like American hospitals are bad. No. In fact, I have dedicated a portion of the proceeds of any of the sale of anything that I do here to Cook Children's Hospital mm-hmm. in Fort Worth. Cook was a phenomenal resource for us back. It's been 8 years ago. My youngest son nearly died of an infection that he picked up while he was rock climbing up in Colorado. Wow. And he contracted hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, and he spent a week mm-hmm. on a ventilator. He almost died.
Yes.
And we are so exceptionally grateful to the folks at Cook Children's, because without their help, he would not be with us. He fortunately recovered completely, and I've got to say to thank for that. But I don't want, this is fiction, and that's why I wrote it this way. Yeah. But this could be any hospital in any community anywhere. I just happen to choose the area of the country that I'm familiar with.
Sure. But it could be a hospital, it could be an insurance company, or it could be a government bureaucracy. But let's just take an obvious, for instance. You as a doctor recognize that this particular drug is probably most effective, but they say in order to save money, let's get the generic. But you as a doctor know that, well, there are contraindications, there are problems, there are all sorts of reasons why I want to use this particular drug. But there are people that are not there watching the circumstances, understanding the circumstances, telling you how to actually run your practice.
Well, and that's true. But in all fairness, many of those entities that are trying to do the regulation, they have physicians on their payroll too. Mm-hmm. And it's their doctor who says, oh, well, this medicine is just as good as that one. It does the same thing. They may not be directly involved even in that part of medicine. They may not know. Yeah. In one of the books, we talk about this idea of getting pre-approval for specific mm-hmm. Procedures. And oftentimes it is you're treated almost like you're a criminal, that you're having to justify everything that you recommend for every patient because you're only doing it to try and make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Well, that's just not the way we're trained. Now, unfortunately, the more they keep pushing things in that direction, it's almost as if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right, that people are, in fact, now going in directions in medicine because, hey, this is easy, I can get paid for this, as opposed to, man, I have to work extra hard and I have to get 15 employees over here all talking to insurance companies trying to get what I think is the right thing to do. And therein lies the ethical situation that all physicians, I think, are facing.
Well, at one point, Dr. Jack Roberts is tired of fighting the system, and he decides to run for political office, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Talk about that for just a minute.
Actually, the beginning of the second book is a flashback. Jack is on the 10th floor of the Worthington Hotel on election night 2012, and he's reflecting back on how in the world did he get there, because he's waiting for the election returns to come in. He's running for Congress. And why would a physician who is in a busy practice decide to do that? Because he's fed up with the system and feels as though, well, maybe if I get to Washington, I could change it. You mentioned you have Michael Burgess in here before.
There's a number now in Congress that have MD degrees. Yeah, go ahead.
And they're trying their best to change it, but unfortunately, our voice is not heard loudly enough. I've been to D.C. on numerous occasions lobbying for physician issues, and everyone nods their head, yeah, we understand, but ultimately the answer is we are not going to side with that. We're going to side with wherever the big lobbyist money is, and it's not coming from physicians.
You have one called The Crisis, too, because that's a situation where Dr. Jack Roberts faces a crisis himself. I'll speak to that if you might.
Yeah, well, going through the situation that I went through with my son, who nearly died, that was kind of the inspiration for this part of the story. I wanted to make the reader be familiar with the emotions that physicians go through, especially when we're in a life and death situation where ourselves or our own family members. It's a lot more challenging because we know too much, and you kind of wonder, is everybody else aware of this, and what are their motivations? And obviously, you can't be second guessing everything that the caregiver does, but that's exactly what happens.
Yeah. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the solutions. People listening right now say, okay, you've reminded me of all the reasons why I try to not go to the doctor. I try to figure out how to deal with this as much as possible, why my insurance premiums are so high, and why my doctor seems so much more distracted than he was just a few years ago. What are the solutions? And, of course, you mentioned one in passing. You opted out of the system. But for others, let's talk about what can be done or should be done. So let's take a break. And if you would like to join our conversation today, we are talking about health care policy, health insurance, and the kinds of issues that I think are going to be part of this campaign, not only at the presidential level, but also we have 34 United States Senate races and 435 races for the House of Representatives. I think you need to ask your elected representatives or those candidates how they're going to solve that. We're going to give you a few of our solutions, but they're the ones that are going to be making the policy. We'd like to hear from them as well. And if you'd like to join us, we'd like to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
I had what many would call the Cadillac of insurance plans with my company. It covered everything, and that's what got us started thinking, well, what is everything? Are we indirectly paying for people to use services that we don't believe in or want to be a part of? And Medishare was the perfect answer for that.
I felt such relief switching over to Medishare. I wasn't paying for anything that I didn't believe in. I was actually able to stand up for what I believe in, and I was able to put my money where my faith is.
We're part of this great program, and it really costs us less than insurance.
Learn how thousands of Christians can help you save on your health care. For your free information guide, call 855-BIBLE-11. Not available in Montana. Medishare, affordable biblical health care. Call 855-BIBLE-11. That's 855-BIBLE-11.
Point of View Radio needs you in 2016. Join today at pointofview.net. Become a monthly partner. Pointofview.net. Or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, we are privileged to have in studio with us Dr. Robert Sewell, and I might just mention that we have a link to his website, A Surgeon's Heart. And again, this is a series of books, novels, which I think you're going to find very interesting, the story of Dr. Jack Roberts. And it starts with the calling, then the conflict, the crisis, the choice, and the challenge. And so this would be just great summer reading. It would be a great book to give to people that are interested in medicine, or maybe even your own doctor, and say, I understand a little bit better about what you're going through after reading these books. But at the same time, really trying to help us that are on the outside looking in and understanding some of the challenges that are being faced here in the medical field. Dr. Sewell, let's, if we can, then maybe talk about some solutions. And I'll take the first one, and that is you have decided to opt out. And there are some individuals I know that are saying, well, if I'm going to practice medicine, if I don't have to get all this money going through the federal government or through various insurance companies, then I can do medicine actually the way my grandfather used to do medicine. So talk about that for just a minute, because I know some doctors are going in that direction.
Well, that's true, and most of the people who are going in that direction are primary care.
Right.
And I can tell you that as a surgeon, it is much more difficult than it is for primary care docs. Yeah. But the reason why I think many are going in that direction and why I went that direction was because when you finish medical school, you go to a graduation ceremony and they have you stand up and recite this thing called the Hippocratic Oath.
Right.
Or at least they used to.
They don't
and
now.
I will tell you, not very many medical students today are even doing that, because there's a problem with the Hippocratic Oath. And that is that it says you're there to serve the needs of your patient.
Yeah.
Not the needs of some third-party bureaucrat, not the needs of some insurance executive, not the needs of some hospital administrator. You are there, you commit your life to that. When you do that, and then you turn around and become part of a system that is orchestrated, trying to move you in a different direction, it creates an ethical dilemma. And what was interesting is that this I opted out of all the insurance contracts about 14 years ago. And what I found was that people called me up and said, well, I'd like to come see you, but I can't. My insurance company won't let me. Now that's, I operate on their mother, I operate on their sister or whatever, and next thing you know, they can't come see me because their insurance company says no. What's really interesting about that is that I'm also a member of the American College of Surgeons, and back in the day, we had this fellowship pledge of the American College of Surgeons, and the third paragraph of that pledge says, upon my honor, I hereby declare I will not practice fee splitting. Mm-hmm. That was established back in the day when it was common that a physician would send a patient for surgery, this is like 100 years ago, and expect a kickback. The American College of Surgeons said, no, we think that's unethical, that it shouldn't be that way. But if you think about it, when a physician signs up with an insurance contract and says, okay, I'm going to submit my bills through them, and they're going to pay me a percentage. They're not going to pay me what I bill. They're going to pay me a percentage based on some formula, and they're going to keep the rest. The rest doesn't go back to the patient. They goes to the insurance company, in exchange for the fact that they will actually allow you to see their patients. In many cases, even funnel patients in that direction. Yeah. That's the essence of what it means to have a fee splitting process.
That's right.
And so I chose not to violate that principle. And much to my chagrin, I can tell you, I don't have nearly as many patients as I used to have, but those that come usually are there because they want what I have to offer, better, more personal service, a little time to spend and talk about their problem, develop a true patient-physician relationship. It's not one of those get in line, get scheduled. I see patients now, and I say, who did your surgery 3 weeks ago? I don't know.
Yeah.
They don't even know the name of their doctor because it's not a personal relationship any longer.
Yeah. Now, one way that has been proposed, and certainly many people have talked about getting back to that doctor-patient relationship, is to have things like health savings accounts, so that I'm not asking the insurance company or I'm not asking a bureaucrat in the Department of Health and Human Services if I can go to you. I have really a very significant amount of cash that, at least for smaller expenses, I have the control over. That seems like a very good way to go, don't you think?
Absolutely. You know, Ben Carson had that as his major plank in his whole campaign. He and I talked about that at Fort Worth Surgical Society meeting about a year and a half ago. And the idea is suddenly you become a consumer.
Yes.
You decide how to spend your money, as opposed to what we have now is prepaid healthcare. You pay off a premium to some third party, and then they decide what you get. You're trusting in them almost to be your advocate, and that's not their role. So the physician's role is to be your advocate. And if I have to sit here in front of you and say, I have to justify you spending money on what I think you need, you and I are going to have that face-to-face account. If there's a third party involved, then neither of us care.
Yeah.
You don't care what it costs. I don't care what it charge, whether you definitely need this or is there a cheaper way to go. I'm going to go with whatever the insurance company says. That is really a sad way to practice medicine. I grant you, we need to have some type of catastrophic, overreaching policy.
I understand that,
because, as I mentioned, my son was deathly ill. I mean, it was a $125,000 hospital bill. I'm not prepared to write anybody a check for that, and I don't assume that much would be around for a health savings account either. But if we used insurance for health care the way we use insurance for our car, the way we use insurance for our homes, where it's there for catastrophic things. It doesn't pay for every oil change. It doesn't pay for the house to get painted.
Well, and that's another issue, and that is the insurance companies and my company, or if you work for a business, doesn't own my car insurance, doesn't own my life insurance, doesn't own my house insurance, but it owns my medical insurance. And that's back to something that happened after World War II, where we had wage and price control. So the way you could provide a benefit was to actually provide a health care policy. But that's the problem, because if you have a third party, and it doesn't matter whether it's your company, whether it's an insurance company, or most importantly, whether it's now the government, when the third party is paying for it, you're not really being very price conscious, but you also don't have very mumuch control over that either, do you?
Well, I have a political cartoon that I had drawn up for me back in 2009. That basically is a doctor's office, and the doctor and the patient are sitting there. They're looking at one another, and they both have their sleeves rolled up. They have tourniquets around their arms, and they're shooting up with a great big needle. They're both addicts. Mm-hmm. On the side of the needle, it says third-party payment. Yeah. We have become addicts to this process because the doctor doesn't believe he can provide health care except through third-party payment. The patient doesn't believe he can get health care except through third-party payment. Right next to them, inside the exam room now, we've got two other people. One is the insurance executive. He's got these syringes in every pocket, and he's sitting there counting his money, big grin on his face. And next to him is the government, in the form of Mr. Obama at that time, tapping him on the shoulder, saying, and the caption reads, "I'll take over from here."
Yeah.
Now, there's a sign over the door that says what Nancy Reagan said about drug addiction: just say no.
Yeah.
Until we reach a point where people are hurting badly enough that they're willing to say, I've had it with this. And I hear stories all the time. I got insurance, but it doesn't pay for anything. I now have insurance, but the deductibles are $5,000 a year or higher. Mm-hmm. My copay is tripled. Why is all that happening? It's because the government is involved. And the solution, as we get to in the latter books, is you got to get to a system that doesn't involve the government. And until that's the real challenge. How do you create a healthcare system out of this? Because currently, with a $3 trillion a year industry in healthcare, there are way too many people with their fingers too deep in that pie. And these are influential folks. They're not going to pull away from that, even though we know that we could probably cut the price of healthcare in half if we just get rid of all the regulations.
We'll get back to those books, The Choice and the Challenge, because those are some important issues that are all, again, fictional stories of Dr. Jack Roberts. But let me just mention, as we're going to a break, that we do have a link to these books, and they can be found at the website asurgeonsheart.com. And you don't have to remember that. We have a link to it as well, and that will give you a chance to read any or all of the books. There's a little video there that you can watch, and you might want to pass that on to others. And then it is available. You can get signed copies, you can get an ebook, and of course you can also participate in some of the conversation we're having about healthcare today. And when we come back, we'll talk about that challenge. We'll talk about the choice. What about patient choice? We talk about that. What does that really mean, and how can we implement that in a way that brings our healthcare system back to some level of sanity? We'll talk about that with Dr. Robert Sewell right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. We're privileged to have in studio for just a few more minutes here Dr. Robert Sewell as we talk about his series, A Surgeon's Heart, and we have a link to it on our website. But the last two of the 5 books are The Choice and The Challenge. The challenge is pretty obvious. That is, there is really not a lot of impetus right now on the part of the health insurance industry or even the health delivery industry to make major changes. Already we've seen remarkable changes that have come about because of the Affordable Care Act. But nobody's going to turn loose of a $3 trillion a year industry, this health issue. So in your book, you actually go outside of the United States for an answer. Explain if you might.
Well, actually, I would love nothing better than to see us be able to make some changes here in the U.S., but the laws are almost prohibitive. The idea of even bringing a new product to market, which is an integral part of this whole plot line. There's a new innovative mechanism for doing surgical procedures on the heart that Jack's brother comes up with, actually. But it's almost impossible to bring something like that to the market without spending millions, if not $1 billion, just to go through all the gauntlet necessary. So I think the challenge really is creating a different system that then will become the template that will then be re-imported, if you will. And I base that on the idea, if you think about the history of medicine, there have been a number of things that have been truly revolutionary in their process. And one of them was back in the late 1800s, there was a couple of guys who went to medical school at the University of Chicago. And they went back to practice with their dad. They were surgeons after they finished their training. And they started up a new hospital with a group of nuns. And 26 beds, I believe, was what it started. And this was in the middle of virtually nowhere. The plains of southern Minnesota you would never go to if you didn't absolutely have to. Mm-hmm. And they created a system there that was better. It was more integrated. There were specialists of all sort that they brought in eventually. Right. And they created the Mayo Clinic. And the Mayo Clinic, even in the early part of the last century, in the early 1900s, people were going there from all over the place. And even today, people go to the Mayo Clinic from everywhere around the world. Why? Because their perception is that they get better care there. Their perception is there's more expertise. There may or may not be, but that is the perception. Right now, our crisis isn't the perception of good quality care. Our crisis is the perception of, can I even get care? Mm-hmm. And can I afford it? So people are going outside the United States today for health care. There's a program taking you to India to have heart surgery. You go to Indonesia to have various things. Incidentally, I saw a lady the other day for reflux disease. I was treating her with this new Lynx device. She came from Jakarta, Indonesia, because she couldn't get that procedure even over there. That's just a little aside. But the point is that if we were to create a new and different healthcare system that centered on the patient rather than on the payer, right. That's the problem we have today. Our whole healthcare system is centered on the payer.
Yeah.
If we can center our system back on the patient and make that work, then that becomes something where people will migrate toward. Once folks begin to migrate toward something new, everybody wants to do that in order to make it work. And I think that's what it's going to take. An example, if you will. Granted, this is fiction, and I don't want anybody to think otherwise, but it's fiction that I think has some real potential to actually work.
Well, let's move from fiction to reality. We just had a Democratic National Convention the week before a Republican National Convention. First of all, there wasn't a lot of discussion about health care, but when it came up, it almost always seemed to be the Bernie Sanders, let's go and give government more authority. Let's go to a single-payer plan. I've seen Canada, I've seen the UK and other places. When you have more and more bureaucratic control, it seems to me that it will frustrate you doctors even more. Is that a fair statement?
That is absolutely correct. And I think what we're seeing now is the physicians are at it. We're seeing, I know doctors in their early 60s. They're looking for a way out because they're just tired of dealing with the bureaucracy. Patients, we love the patients. We are challenged by the idea of helping patients. And most patients really want to love their doctor. But that relationship is being split apart by all of these various things you're talking about. Now, in the UK, you're right. Healthcare is free for everybody. You walk on there, no charge. But you have to get in line. And sometimes the line can be extraordinarily long. And if you happen to be over a certain age and you need a procedure that they can't justify your life expectancy based on your age alone, you don't get that procedure. There's a little bit of that discussion even right in the first book.
Emmanuel Rahm Emanuel's brother is the one that was part of
Ezekiel
Emanuel. And so you got that same situation here, even in the United States. And that's where we called death panels and all of that, because you're just too old for us to justify scarce medical resources for those individuals.
Or in the case of, I went the other direction in my novels. We're talking about infants born with congenital heart defects.
There you go.
And, a typical cost of fixing a major heart valve problem is, a couple $100,000. If the child happens to be born also with another problem, like Down syndrome.
Sure.
Now all of a sudden you have a real dilemma on your hands. I wrote a little short story that's also on the website called The Code,
yes,
which is about the code of medical ethics and the assault that is currently underway, because the traditional code of medical ethics does not allow for us to become stewards of the overall cost of healthcare to a society. We're there to take care of one patient at a time.
Well, again, it's just an illustration of why you've written those books. And again, if you are just joining us, let me just mention that we've been talking with Dr. Robert Sewell, and I think you'll really be fascinated by these books: The Calling, The Conflict, The Crisis, The Choice, and The Challenge. They're all part of A Surgeon's Heart, and you can go to asurgeonsheart.com. We have a link to it in our website. And as they go there, just for a minute, Dr. Sewell, talk about what is there, because people can get it in paperback or they can get an ebook. There's also some videos and some other resources. So talk about what they'll find when they land on your website.
Well, on the website, the first thing is there's a picture of me. Not that means anything, but there is also the titles of each of the 5 books, and then underneath that, the title of the short story, the Code. The Code is only available on Kindle or the Kindle app. You can't very well publish something like that in paperback. But you're in addition to the information about the books, each of the reviews that I've received from all of the sources, both on Amazon as well as through my website itself, there's a place to provide feedback. I've published each one of those from every location. I've gotten one 4-star review. Every other review has been 5 stars. I got one 4-star review, and it was from a doctor, and this guy in Mississippi, and he had glowing things to say about it. And then he turned out and gave it 4 stars instead of 5. He is not going to give it.
You're only going to get a B+.
That's right. There's no such thing as a 5-star in some people's minds.
That's pretty good. So again, you can find all of that at the asurgeonsheart.com. Of course, we have all of that at our website, pointofview.net. If you know somebody in the medical field, let me encourage you maybe to download the podcast and send it to them, or go to our YouTube channel, send it to them as well. They're going to be going, yeah, I didn't know these books existed. And if nothing else, a great summer read. So, Dr. Sewell, thank you so much for your practice of medicine, but thank you for being such a good novelist today.
Kerby, thank you very much for having me.
That's all we have for today. It's going to be a busy week. Eric Metaxas is with us, and Dr. John Lott, all sorts of people, but you had a chance today to hear Dr. Robert Sewell. Let me again thank Andrew, Alyssa, Catherine, Shamila, and all those involved behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
A prince, falsely accused of treason, separated from his family and the woman he loves, forced into slavery. He returns home seeking revenge, but instead finds redemption. It's brother against brother in Ben-Hur, with Academy Award winner Morgan Freeman.
If your brother is the pride of Rome, defeat him and you'll defeat an empire. Then you will have your vengeance.
Ben-Hur, in theaters August 19th from Paramount Pictures, rated PG-13. $5 doesn't buy much anymore, but $5 can change hearts and a nation. The 2016 presidential election has been very divisive, so what is a Christian to do? Kerby Anderson and the team at Point of View Radio will be here each day on the road to November, and your $5 investment will make a difference. You want to do more? Fine, do it, but please stop what you're doing and at least give us $5. Visit pointofview.net, look for the Donate Now button, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or send your gift to Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.